Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I am Damon Martin.
And I'm Patrick Zedmore.
And Patrick, this week, of course, we are reviewing the new film, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which it's funny. Last week when we did Love Lies Bleeding, we had to kind of open the show by saying, this isn't strictly horror. I don't know that Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is any different, really, just in a slightly different genre. It's a much more family-friendly movie, but you're involving ghosts and hauntings, so kind of technically it's horror, so it's also a very big film, so, you know, we jump on the train, we strap on the proton packs, and we start busting ghosts.
That's right, Damon. I mean, listen, Ghostbusters is part of this genre because it does deal with ghosts, and I think most of us grew up on some way, shape, or form the Ghostbusters. And Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, of course, released in March of 2024, starring Paul Rudd, Carrie Coon, Finn Wolfhard, McKenna Grace, Kumail Nanjiani, Patton Oswalt, Celeste O'Connor, Logan Kim, Emily Anlin. Oh my gosh, the list goes on and on. Damon, we haven't even gotten to Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson and Annie Potts and William Atherton returning as Mayor Walter Peck, written and directed by Gil Kanan, with Jason Reitman writing as well, with Ivan Reitman's old story with Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis. I mean, whew, Damon, when you talk about legacy sequels, we packed it all in, didn't we, for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire?
We surely did. That cast list was long, man. Let me tell you, there's a lot of people in this movie. And it follows up, of course, from Ghostbusters Afterlife, which we reviewed when it came out in 2021, which you and I both adored. There was a lot of nostalgia, not going to lie, because that was the return to Ghostbusters. Hadn't been a Ghostbusters movie since 89, I think is when Ghostbusters 2 came out. Of course, you know, we lost Harold Ramis, the great Harold Ramis, who played Egon Spengler. So it was, that movie tugged at all the heartstrings, which, you know, again, we can talk full spoilers on that movie, of course, because it's, you know, 3 years old at this point. But, you know, when that movie, when Egon showed up as a ghost at the end, I mean, I wept like a child. I was like, this is everything I've ever wanted in a movie, and I was so happy for it. This one is more of a straightforward story than Afterlife. You're not just injected with nostalgia the entire time through, because they're not trying to surprise you at the end with the old Ghostbusters coming back in uniform and coming in to help save the day. This time around, Dan Aykroyd's character, you know, Ray Stantz, is a major character in the film, and so is Winston Zeddemore, of course, the great Ernie Hudson, and Bill Murray, as you mentioned, also makes an appearance. And he's not necessarily a cameo appearance. He shows up early in the film as well. It's not like a big surprise when he comes back. Same thing with Annie Potts playing Janine Melnitz. So this is kind of like a film that just feels like a Ghostbusters film. This isn't drenched in nostalgia. This isn't drenched in like, let's get you all emotional for the big punch at the end of the movie like Afterlife was. Now, I thought Afterlife was pretty expertly crafted the way they did it. This movie also did have a little bit of a somber undertone as well, though, because Jason Reitman, the son of original creator Ivan Reitman, was a co-writer on the script. He didn't come back to direct it. Gil Kenan, who co-wrote Ghostbusters Afterlife and has been a lifelong Ghostbusters fan and a lifelong friend of Jason Reitman, he took over directing because Jason had already signed on to film that new Saturday Night Live 1975 movie they're doing, the Saturday Night Live retrospective. So he had already signed on to do that, so he couldn't return to direct. But sadly, as they started getting ready for this film, Ivan Reitman, Jason's father, passed away. And so this film, in a weird way, kind of became a love letter to him because he had signed off on the story, the script, and basically said, I love it, go make it. And then sadly, Ivan passed away.
Yeah, and there is, you're right. There's not it's not a touch of nostalgia. It's literally just like the gang back in another movie. You know, obviously in a different capacity and sharing a lot of time with the new Spangler family that we developed so well in Ghostbusters Afterlife. And now, you know, on the wings of Ghostbusters Afterlife, the Spangler family is in a new setting, right? They have moved to New York. They are going to live in the firehouse because where were they? Like Oklahoma or something. You know, basically they need to leave because I think they destroyed their old family home out there, killing Zool and Gozer. And so they find themselves now living in New York City, living in the firehouse, and being the Ghostbusters. So, you know, they did it before. Now they're going to do it for real. Now it's going to be their job. It's now the family business. and the kids are getting older, and there's a new dynamic there. And so you're going from like, oh, like, how is this family going to, come together in Ghostbusters Afterlife, to now, how is this family going to handle the new dynamic and the new responsibility they have of being Ghostbusters in the big city in New York, completely different setting and backdrop. And ghosts are now just a regular part of life. The movie kicks off, you see a lot of it in the trailer, with them chasing down some ghosts and doing some ghost busting. And that mayor, Walter Peck, played by the great William Atherton. You see him in the trailer, and he's always had it out for those damn Ghostbusters, and he's looking for a way to shut them down for good. He was just an EPA agent in the first movie. In the very first movie, he was just there from the Environmental Protection Agency, just going, "Hey, why do you have a nuclear reactor in the middle of fucking New York City?" He actually had a point. We find out with a lot of 80s movies, when you look back at them, the bad guy usually like wasn't actually a bad guy. They were just trying to like keep the chaos from going around. But William Atherton has this great knack of just being a total pencil dick, like just being an asshole. And he doesn't like the Ghostbusters one bit. And now he's the mayor, and this new group of Ghostbusters, the Spengler family. He's like, "I got you guys. Finally, I got you guys. Like you're causing messes all around New York City. I'm going to shut you guys down." But the biggest step at first is shutting down Phoebe working, right? Phoebe Spengler, played by McKenna Grace, is they're out busting that ghost, which you see that in the trailer, and he's like, "You got to go. You can't do child labor. I know I got you guys on that. At bare minimum, you can't have an underage kid working, so you got to go." And that sort of creates a rift, because listen, she considers herself the spiritual and natural successor to her grandfather Egon. And so she's like, "I'm the Ghostbuster. Like, you can't take me out of the ghost busting." And they do that in this, or they sort of do it in this movie. He grounds her, the mayor grounds her, and it creates that new rift. But then also, Damon, just coincidentally, just by chance, this guy, Nadim, played by Kumail Nanjiani, rolls into Ray's shop. And again, this is not spoiler stuff. You see it in the trailer, and he's got an orb with him. Damon, can you guess what's in that orb? Can you just guess? Is it just like a ghost that's ready to destroy the world?
It's something bad. It's something bad. It's something bad, and that's exactly it. And also want to give credit where credit's due to William Atherton, because not only does he play a pencil dick in Ghostbusters, he also does it brilliantly in Die Hard and Die Hard 2 as well. He's fantastic in both those movies.
In Real Genius, like one of my favorite fucking movies from the 80s, he's another pencil dick in that one too. It's fantastic pencil dick.
And William Atherton is also responsible for one of my favorite lines from the original Ghostbusters, where they call him Dickless, and the mayor goes, "Is this true?" And Peter Venkman goes, "Yes, it's true, Your Honor. This man has no dick," which is just one of the greatest Ghostbusters line of all time. So he's very much the evil, the mayor who's had it out for them forever. And one thing I do want to compliment this movie for, you mentioned in the beginning, like when we start this movie, they are just out ghost busting. The Ghostbusters are back. They're rolling through at Ecto 1. There are ghosts existing in New York City. I appreciated that, because in Ghostbusters in 1984, it took everyone time to accept what was actually happening. And they kind of did that again in the 89 version, because 5 years later, everyone had kind of gone back to almost like psychically believing this never happened. Like they're all kind of living in this delusion that there were no ghosts in 1984. This was all some elaborate hoax. So they've all kind of forgotten. And then, of course, Vigo, the Carpathian, comes out of nowhere and starts wreaking havoc again. And the Ghostbusters have to swoop in and save the day. Same kind of concept in Afterlife, where at this point it's, 20, 30 years later. And, of course, the world's moved on. They're not even worried. They're not even contemplating ghosts. And the Ghostbusters have to once again kind of come in and save the day. What I did appreciate about the script and the direction they went with Frozen Empire is they're just like, there's ghosts. People know there are ghosts. Let's just get into the story. Let's just get into the busting of ghosts and not have the same thing happen over and over and over again. And I appreciated that, because that was a bit of an evolution in this film. As much as I adore 84 and 89. I actually really like Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2 for that matter, and we
Same.
both really liked Afterlife. I understand why they go that direction because we're all in that, we'd all be a disbeliever in that moment. Like, we all like to believe in hauntings and things like that, but realistically, most people would be like, come on, that's bullshit. The fact that they didn't just go that route for a fourth time and they're like, there are ghosts, we're out in the world, and we're stopping them. I appreciate they just went and moved on.
Yeah, you got at some point you have to, right? Like it's like the Spider-Man movies. At some point you have to stop getting to the origin of Spider-Man and just get into letting him be Spider-Man. And they, the Tom Holland Spider-Mans are very much that. It's like, let's just start him as Spider-Man. He's already Spider-Manning. At this movie, we're already ghost busting. The world is into it. The people call us to make it happen. So we're just rolling in. And for the most part, I guess what the trailer and what the beginning or the first act of the movie kind of establishes is that it's all good. Ghosts are just something you manage, like a rat infestation or anything like that. And the Ghostbusters do it, and they do it on this fun, grand scale. But they're really just taking care of ghost pests. And you need to find a big bad. You need to find something that actually makes or raises the stakes. And in this case, it always has to be a world-ending ghost. It has to be. Now, we took care of Zool. We took care of Gozer. So what do we have now, Damon? We have this freezing ghost. And I don't know how much of it we can really get into pre-spoilers, but that we basically just take on a new idea. You talk about moving on from the other stuff. They've moved on from Gozer. They've moved on from Zool. That's over now. We finished that, but we found ourselves a new world-ending ghost, a ghost that is ready to freeze the world over completely. Oh man, I don't know. I feel kind of tongue-tied, Damon, because how do we? I guess what I can say before we get into all that is that this is a good movie. It's not a great movie. I think Afterlife had the very morbid advantage of being able to go, "We miss you, Egon Spengler." And this is the perfect way to kind of tie all this in, is that we lost somebody, and what does it mean to lose somebody, and still hold on to their memory, which I think that counted towards the fans, that counted towards the cast and crew and the people that made and created Ghostbusters. It was a love letter to Harold Ramis. They missed this guy, and it was a great way to kind of tell the story through the idea of, I miss you, and this is my way of remembering you forever. It was a great thing to do. You don't have that with Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Now you're just trying to tell a story. So a little bit of this movie kind of comes off as like a side quest. I think if there was no Dan Aykroyd or Bill Murray or Annie Potts or Ernie Hudson, this would just be a straight side quest, and it wouldn't. I don't even know if it would garner like a theatrical release without the original Ghostbusters. So there's that element of it. And then there's a few dynamics that are kind of tough to talk about without getting into spoilers. So Damon, I mean, did you enjoy Ghostbusters?
I did enjoy it, but I get what you're saying. And the best way I can equate it for our audience, and this is going to sound like a weird comparison, but this is the best way I can say it. This felt like Ghostbusters, the TV show, and this was another episode. A good episode, make no mistake about it, a good episode, right? But if you think about some of the greatest television shows of all time, you think about Breaking Bad, you think about The Sopranos. When you reach to the end of, or Game of Thrones, or any epic, any great TV show, you reach to the conclusion, you are just waiting for that, I am the one who knocks moment. I know that wasn't a finale, but you're waiting for that grand moment, that say my name, Heisenberg. You're waiting for that moment. You're waiting for Tony to order someone getting whacked. You're waiting for who is going to die in Game of Thrones, because that was a big thing through the first few seasons. You knew somebody was going to bite it and die towards the end of the season. There's these big climactic moments. But when you watch the rest of the seasons, like when you watch the rest of, I'm going to use Game of Thrones as an example. Like Game of Thrones, typically speaking, for a 10-episode season, until the show fell off the face of the earth and went to crap the final season, even though you were always ascending towards the big moment in episode 9 and 10. Episode 9 was always actually like the big moment, and 10 was
Yeah.
almost like the follow-up. But episode 3, 4, somewhere in there, you would still have some pretty cool, crazy stuff happen, right? You'd be like, oh my God, what a great moment. What happens next week? Or who dies? Or whatever. That's kind of what Ghostbusters Frozen Empire feels like to me. It feels like a good episode of TV. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. It was a fine story. This sounds like the most backhanded compliment ever. It was good enough. Like, it was good enough. But there's also going to be that aspect of when you do a movie like this, it has to be grand. It has to be a finale. It has to be Sopranos season 1, episode 13. It has to be Game of Thrones season 3, episode 10, or whatever. I'm just, you want it to feel that, like, that sense of finale, that sense of conclusion, to where when it's over, you're like, holy crap, I can't believe I just witnessed this. Afterlife felt like that.
Yeah.
Now, as you said very astutely, they were working from a much more. Now, I don't want to discount Ivan Reitman's passing, by the way. I just want to be clear. They already had this written and ready to go. They didn't rewrite it just to try to pay tribute to Ivan Reitman as the director. But they were working with a much more emotional element in Afterlife, paying tribute. And they did it beautifully to Harold Ramis.
They really did, yeah.
Co-creator, the heart and soul of that franchise, let's be honest. I know he didn't get as much publicity as Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray, but I guarantee if you talk to either one of those guys, who was the heartbeat of the Ghostbusters, they would say it was Harold Ramis. So they had that working for them. And you remember when you saw the second Ghostbusters Afterlife trailer, I know you hate trailers, but I thought they did a pretty good job because they didn't tease a lot about the reunion, about the people coming back from the old movies. It was really a focus on, and they didn't give you a hint that it was Egon's family at that point. But at the very end of the second trailer, there's this moment where they're calling a phone, and the phone rings, and you pick up, and you hear them say, "Raise a cult." Done. That's all they did.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's Ray, it's Dan Aykroyd. Just that brilliant, and that alone hooked everybody. And then when you actually get in the movie, it was just an emotional roller coaster, and it hit all the beats because they brought back the villain from the first movie, all the tie-ins. It was just really, really well done. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is not a bad film. It's an enjoyable film. When it was over, I was like, that was fun. I'm glad I went. It was a good enough movie. But it felt like that mid-season TV episode to me where it's like, it was good. It wasn't great. It was good enough. It wasn't spectacular. And I know that sounds like a really backhanded compliment. Trust me when I say this, Patrick. We review a lot of bad movies over the years. 180 some odd episodes in, we've had a lot of movies where you and I are scratching our heads saying, what in the hell did we just watch? So when I give a backhanded compliment like it's good enough, people are like, well, does that really like a ringing endorsement? It is, because I don't regret going to the theater to see this. I don't regret spending my money to go see this. And if you are in any way, shape, or form a Ghostbusters fan, I think you will probably enjoy this. But you have to set your expectations. And I think that's the big difference with this film is it felt like a good mid-season TV show rather than that epic grand finale.
You're 100% right, because it really didn't have the emotional pull that the other movies have had. It just didn't. It can't. There's nothing you could do. And I feel like when we talked about Ghostbusters Afterlife, I think you and I agreed, cool, we have a new set of Ghostbusters that we can focus on. Let's do that. Let's go and focus on them. And that's essentially what Frozen Empire does. I think at least half of it, or maybe the A story. And indeed, that's very much like an episode of television. There's an A story, which we have the Spengler family, which is Paul Rudd and Carrie Coon and Finn Wolfhard and McKenna Grace. They're the A story. They're the kind of story we need to focus on as the main story for Frozen Empire. But then you have a B story with Kumail Nanjiani. You have a C story with the original Ghostbusters team, or as many of them as they get together. There's even some D and C stories that are very minor. And in an episode of television, your D and C story might only be a scene in a 30-minute episode or 2 scenes in an hour-long episode. That's kind of what this was doing. It was literally here's a little C story, and we'll show you little bits of it. It'll be a 2-minute scene, and then we kind of move on from it, and it'll just kind of help. It'll help make A and B stories collide properly. It was connector bits. So it weirdly came off like that. You're totally astute. It is very much just a mid-season episode. There's nothing wrong with that. I liked it. I'm echoing what you're saying. I like this movie. It's a good movie. It's not great, and it's not Ghostbusters Afterlife. That movie, boy, oh boy, every time I rewatch it, I go, this is special. It's not just good, it's great. This is just good, and that should be good enough. And honestly, sometimes I sit in the theater and go, this isn't good enough. this this required my time and my focus, and it did not deliver. Ghostbusters, Frozen Empire, it delivers. It delivers on a little bit of nostalgia because you do have the older crew. You see Slimer in the trailer. Slimer's back. There's a couple other nods to some older ghosts too. So there is that nostalgia bit, but it is just sort of a like, hey, this is something in the middle. And maybe if there's going to be a third movie, the Spengler family is going to have to truly be the A story and the B story. They're going to have to kind of be both. And it might be like, Finn Wolfhard's character, Trevor, like wanting to move on and not be a Ghostbuster or something like that. I'm already doing Rewrite of the Living Dead. But it's going to need to be something like that, where it's like that family, that core family who is carrying us into the new stories, you're going to have to find like a way to make their, like, the stakes of their lives that much higher. It won't be enough to just go, oh, there's another world-ending ghost coming. It's going to have to be about the family to really feel like we're sending this new era home.
Yeah, and I know, just to give credit where credit's due, Gil Kinnan, the director and writer, I had read some interviews with him leading into this movie, and he said that ideally, they already have ideas for other Ghostbusters movies, but more than anything, he wants to complete what he is calling the Phoebe Spengler trilogy, which is McKenna Grace's character. The way he's looking at is these are her films, and she very much is the lead in the first two movies. I mean, she is very much the lead here as well, and they give McKenna Grace a lot to chew on. So he said, like, if we do nothing else, if we don't spin off anything else, we don't do TV, we don't do anything else, I want to complete the Phoebe Spengler trilogy. And I appreciate that, because you can definitely tell that's where they're leading here. What it will be, how it will be, will it happen, I don't know. But the fact that they've already kind of laid the groundwork for that they want this to be her story, I'm cool with that. Two things I want to call out that I didn't enjoy, and this goes back a little bit to Afterlife. Now that I've thought about it a little bit, this is not spoiler. The two things in particular that I'm going to call out here that I didn't enjoy, that aren't spoiler related, but I think you'll see where I'm going. And I thought about this long and hard after I got out of the movie, because like you and we talked about in the review show, like we full on filleted Afterlife. It was an incredible movie.
What an image.
Yeah, I know. Two things in particular that bug me about the reinvented Ghostbusters franchise, and I think you'll see where I'm coming here. First off, more than anything, one thing I loved about Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2 as well, in 84 and 89, was they did skirt the line a little bit more to like dirty PG-13 humor.
Yeah.
My girlfriend and I were just joking and laughing the other night, quoting Shrek, the cartoon movie Shrek. There's so much adult humor stuffed in there that if your kid, like, you have kids, I don't have kids, but like your kids will watch it, they'll still enjoy watching Shrek. But for the parents who are watching, the reason why I like Shrek is because there's some like really like low-key dirty humor in that movie, like that singing thing when they show up to town and he's like,
I've never seen the Shrek movies. So I wouldn't have a reference. Yeah.
How have you not seen Shrek with kids? What are you doing over there? What's going on
because I don't want to watch kids movies. We watch Aliens instead.
So Shrek has some really underlying, like, funny adult humor in it that you and your wife would get, but it would kind of go over your kid's head. Like, they would not understand what you're laughing at. Anyways, Ghostbusters had a really innate ability to do that. Like Venkman flirting with the girl at the test, like messing with her boyfriend, saying things like the line I said about William Atherton's character where he says, "Yes, it's true, Your Honor, this man has no dick." That's kind of crass, like crude humor for a PG-13 movie, right? Like little things like that. That great scene in the first one where Venkman is drinking the bottle of Wild Turkey and he's sitting there with Ray and he's like, "We're going to do it, Ray." And Ray's like, "How are we going to pay for it?" And Venkman's drinking the liquor and he goes, "I don't know. I don't know." Just little adult humor stuck in there. They haven't really done this. They've really like PG'd this movie up. There's really no adult humor in this. Now, If you're taking your kids to see it, you're probably like, shut up, because this is what I want. I don't want them. But that was what I loved about the original two. Like, when, like even in part two, when Venkman reconnects with Dana, which is the great Sigourney Weaver, and he's playing the bass and he's like making fun of her ex. And he's like, he's talking to her son. He's like, was daddy a stinky? Like, there's just like this underlying, like, there's always this little bit of perverted nature to Peter Venkman. Like, he was like the horniest Ghostbuster in the world. There's that element missing in these films. And it's not because Bill Murray isn't around. Like, Bill Murray is, and I know there's that throwaway line in the trailer where he says, oh, tall, dark, and horny at 3:00. And everyone's like, oh, yeah. That's like their best attempt at that in this movie, and that's in the trailer, so I'm not spoiling anything. I missed that little underlying dirty PG-13 adult humor in these movies. It wasn't in Afterlife, and I kind of let it go because there was just so much other stuff I enjoyed. Didn't really think about it. But as I rewatch it, and as I watch Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, I missed that a little bit. I missed that little bit of adult humor, that, you know, just a little injection, little lines, like I said, like dickless. It's such a funny throwaway line. Right. But that's, you know, yes, it's true, Your Honor. This man has no dick. Incredible. Part two. Now, in Ghostbusters Afterlife, there is a post-credit scene where the great Sigourney Weaver makes a very brief appearance doing the electricity test that I just mentioned with Peter Venkman. Great appearance, right? Gil Kinnan has, I mean, I guess technically you say this is a spoiler, but you've seen all the trailers. You can go on IMDb. Sigourney Weaver's not in this movie. It's not like, this is not, and even if I'm not gonna say anything about a post-credit scene because that's what happened in the first one. Even if she's, I'm saying she's not a major part of the story is what I'm getting at, and you can tell that by watching the trailers. This is not a spoiler. And I read an interview with Gil Kinnan where he talked about that, and he said, yeah, we'd love to bring back this, and we like the nostalgia, and it was fun to bring back William Atherton as Walter Peck and all these kind of things, but we haven't found a place, you know, we'd love to bring back Sigourney Weaver as Dana, but we just really haven't found a place for that yet. And I thought, really? You have so much nostalgia packed into these movies. You brought back Annie Potts as Janine Melnitz. Now, I'm not saying I'm disappointed you brought back Janine Melnitz. I liked her. But the fact that you haven't found a place to put Dana Barrett, to put Sigourney Weaver, who is such a major part of the first two films. Now, I can't say for certain, and they never said it publicly, did they reach out to Sigourney Weaver and she said she's not interested. I have a hard time believing that. Because Sigourney Weaver, you know, you pay her enough money, she'll do Alien Resurrection, okay? I'm quite sure she would do Ghostbusters Afterlife. Or
she's for sale, and I like that about her.
I love that about her. But they're like, we can't figure out how to fit her in the story. And I'm scratching my head saying, really? You can't figure out a way to bring back Dana Barrett. You can't figure out a way to bring back Sigourney Weaver. Listen, we are devoted Sigourney Weaver stans on this show. We are 100%, we love her. We've reviewed the Alien films and you and I adore her. But that one kind of bugged me because I'm kind of like, you bring back everybody, but you can't find a place for Sigourney. Like, is it just a budget thing? Like, you know you're going to have to pay her a whole bunch of money and you don't have like a huge role for her? It just bugged me because I'm just like, how can you not have a place for Sigourney Weaver?
It's funny. Your complaints are almost identical to mine in different ways. So we'll start with the Sigourney thing. So it's weird that you go, we just didn't find a place for her. They found a place for like way too many stories in this movie. Yeah. And that was one of my first complaints with this movie, is that there's almost too many storylines going on. It's a little exhausting, and it's not bad. It's not poorly done. It's just like, God, this is a lot. Like, these are a lot of different things. Like, a lot of, like, Celeste O'Connor, her character Lucky, like, she's in this movie, but she's such a side character. It's really weird, but she's in the movie. Make no mistake. She's part of the movie. She has a storyline in this movie. It's just, she's so far removed from Trevor now, which they were kind of like, you know, will they, won't they in Afterlife. Now she's just there, but she's there like 3 or 4 rows in a different direction. It's super weird. So when you go, oh, there was no room for her, it's like, you made room for literally everything else. I mean, literally everything else. Like I would say Kumail Nanjiani's character Nadeem has like a pretty huge storyline that doesn't take up a ton of space. But it's like it takes up enough. And so I go, wow, like we have so many things going on. And I told my brother this when we went to go see it. he and I are lifelong Ghostbusters fans, obviously, and I go, all that and no Sigourney? Like that's literally what I said to him as we're sitting there watching the credits roll. And I'm waiting for the, the post-credit scene, and they have one, but it's not Sigourney related. But I'm just going, like, how do you go through all this nostalgia, like bringing back the old crew and everything, and just no Sigourney? Now again, she could be filming Avatar 20, we don't know, like she's busy. So for all I know, they did reach out to her, and she was just like, "Hey, I can't do it, or I don't want to, or something." Or maybe they got bigger plans for her in the third version, which, by the way, fine by me. If it means no Sigourney in this movie, but we're gonna get like all Sigourney in the next one, her and Phoebe are doing something, sign me up. That's great because I love Sigourney. You're right, we're total stans. So that's the one thing I had a problem with, was just that the deluge of storylines that were kind of overwhelming this movie. Not a bad thing. There was just a lot of them. Number two was your same complaint. Now, yes, I do miss the adult humor, but also like when you think about the first two Ghostbusters movies, it was a story about a group of adult men. These were all men in their 30s and 40s hanging out, and that's what men in their 30s and 40s are like. The dynamic is completely different. This is a family. Paul Rudd's a teacher, and these are young kids. Finn Wolfhard is supposedly only just 18 in Frozen Empire, and Phoebe's 15, I think.
15.
So like, so there, that kind of humor, or it ain't Euphoria, so we're not going to have that kind of subject matter. It's a totally different thing. This movie, my only other complaint was it's a really saccharine movie. It really just feels like an all shucks, warm hug, sweet, nice, and safe movie for the kids. That's fine, and I want tons of kids to see this, and I want there to be a whole new generation of Ghostbusters fans. So it's not actually a complaint as much as it is just sort of a like, okay, this is really sugary. Like this movie's a very sugary movie, and that's fine. But it, for kids who grew up in the 80s and early 90s, what was PG-13 back then now might not even be allowed on HBO. I'm exaggerating, but it's just one of those things where it's like PG-13 had a whole different meaning when we were growing up. So you don't see it the same in these movies now. Those are my two big complaints. It's not, and it's weird. It's like, it's kind of nitpicking, right? Like, it's like, I liked this movie, nothing wrong with it, but yeah, it's a little saccharine, and there's a whole lot of extra story that I don't think made this movie better. Let's put it that way.
Real quick before we get to spoilers, going back to Sigourney Weaver, there was a character in this movie, and this is not a spoiler. There's a scientist character, a younger scientist character that works in this movie. He's a very minor character. He's in, I don't know, 5 or 6 scenes, and not major by any stretch. Again, this isn't a spoiler. He's just a scientist. Why could, and this is me, I know I'm doing Rewrite of Living Dead, and I'm not trying to rewrite what Gil Kennan and Jason Reitman did, but if you're trying to find a place for Sigourney Weaver, even if it's a minor role, like you said, like the Lucky character, like she's in it for the whole movie, but she's not a major plot point in the movie. Why not make that scientist Oscar from Ghostbusters 2? Make it Sigourney Weaver's son. It's the family business. Like, we're supposed to imagine, based on the post-credit scene, that Venkman and Dana are still together. At least that's the way I took it.
Yeah.
Oscar, her son from the 89 sequel, would be of that age now. He'd be over 20 years old. Why not have him play? Like, wouldn't that have been a nice retreat? You're giving homages everywhere else in this freaking movie.
Yeah. Couldn't Oscar be a 30-year-old scientist who works at the research lab?
Well, he's not even 30. I think he's like 20. He looks like he's like maybe like 27. He looks like he's a very, like, I just got out of college scientist.
Yeah.
Like, couldn't he just be that? Like, make it Oscar, and then she pops up and she's worried about her son? I know that's a very stereotypical woman role, and I hate those roles, and I think we've moved so far beyond that, but like, couldn't we at least inject her in that sense? Like, she's a worried mom about her son, and her husband is now getting in the fray again. Like, anything. It just seems weird to me, because when I read that story from and again, I think what Gil Kennan and Jason Reitman have done is great and admirable and all that. But when I read that interview and he said we just didn't have a place for him, like, how? You have a place for everything else in this movie. How did you not have a place for Sigourney Weaver?
I think you actually made your own point there, is that they didn't want to give her a reductive role. It's Sigourney Weaver. So don't give her the role where she's just worried. Because again, like, with all these storylines going on, you'd go, well, I guess we'll have to trim down the Patton Oswalt storyline or something. You know what I mean? Like you would have to find room somewhere to sacrifice one thing for the other. And they clearly wanted to tell this story. I'd love to believe, just in my own fantasy fan fiction in my own brain, that they're like, look, we can save her for the third story and it'll be more powerful. We'll actually be able to give her time. This is Sigourney fucking Weaver. She's a big deal. I argue she's a bigger deal than Bill Murray, in my opinion, personally. No, Bill Murray, and Bill Murray is in a smattering of this movie. He really is. It almost feels like maybe they just had a little bit of time with him, like maybe they had a week worth of shooting with him, and they got his scenes done. So yeah, if it means holding off on Sigourney to give her a bigger role in a third movie, I cross my fingers. I hope it is the case because it's Sigourney Weaver. I love her.
Yeah, and I want to see her back too. And again, I don't want to. I'm with you. I don't really want to reduce her down to that, but it's just like something, like just get her in there, get her reintroduced to the world, and then make the third one all about her. Make her the central character. I don't care. It just, when I hear that line of like we didn't have a place for her, I just don't buy that because you had a place for everything else. You had a place for every single. Other
Damon,
person.
you and I have a small role in this movie. I mean, there's so many different storylines going on in this movie.
Yeah, and they have like every major character from Ghostbusters, with the exception of the mayor from the original one, who I think has passed away, if I'm not mistaken. The guy who played the mayor of the original Ghostbusters, I think he passed away. Every other major character has popped up in some way, shape, or form. I mean, Harold Ramis was gone, passed away, and he still made an appearance in Afterlife. It seems weird to me that that's the, and again, it could be the public facing excuse of, we asked her and she just didn't have time, so we didn't want to she didn't want to do it, and that would just piss off the fans. It really could have come down to, hey, I'm filming, as you said, Avatar 290, and I can't do it right now. I'm fine with that. It's just when you put that out there publicly, we just didn't have a place for her. There is a place for everything else in this, and it sounds like we're complaining. I'm really not complaining. I'm just saying that. There's an A side, there's a B story, there's a C story, there's a D story, there's an E story, there's an F story. You couldn't have slid her into the E story somewhere? I'm just saying.
Can we slide Sigourney Weaver into this E story somehow?
Just saying. But also, and to your point about the comedy, I agree. Like, they're doing this as more of like a family comedy, but you and I know, Patrick. Like, I remember when American Pie came out, and I was around the age of those kids in that movie. I was a little younger. I was right around that age when that came out. I mean, we can handle it is what I'm getting at. Like 15-year-old kids, 15-year-old kids like McKenna Grace is supposed to be in this movie. They are very much making dirty jokes with their friends.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There's a euphoria side of all of this. Like but that's the other end of the spectrum. Like there could be a happy medium.
But they really do teeter on the, like, let's just go full on family film and not have anything push the envelope. And again, it's a minor complaint. But that's part of what makes the original Ghostbusters such an enjoyable film. And then Ghostbusters 2, I think, did it brilliantly as well, is they just inject those little bit of a little bit of that adult humor that just makes it funny, and you can have great memorable lines. And there's just this, like I said, the underlying horniness of Peter Venkman, like what it is.
There's so many inappropriate lines, like the one in Ghostbusters 2 where Egon's like, I'd like to run some gynecological tests on the mother. Venkman goes, who wouldn't?
Exactly. Yeah, just little things like that, like little lines like that are just like throwaway lines, but they just kind of inject that adult humor. I missed that. I did miss that. Like, again, this did not have the nostalgia factor attached to it like it did Afterlife. When we saw Afterlife, they had me hooked going into the theater. I admitted that on the podcast. Yeah. I admitted it. Like, I was already like, they would have really had to shit the bed for me not to probably enjoy that movie. Now, not only did it not shit the bed, it was great. It was a really fun movie. They killed it with that one. But Frozen Empire, you don't have that working for you anymore. It's 3 years later, you're moving on with the story, and you are focusing primarily on the new characters now. It is now Paul Rudd and Carrie Coon and Finn Wolfhard and McKenna Grace's movie. And yes, while all the other Ghostbusters do appear, Ernie Hudson, I love that they gave him a bigger role in this movie. I love that they, of course, brought back Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray. But they are all, and rightfully so, they are the B characters. They are the supporting characters to our leads. That's all done well. It's just, again, little minor complaint, which is, it doesn't feel that there's like that missing bit of humor in these movies that was more in the Ghostbusters original franchise. Again, it's a minor thing, but I just noticed it.
It's a little thing. And by the way, we always have those movies to go back to. They're pure classics, you know what I mean? And I would even throw Afterlife in as like those are like the top three. You can really just sift through those movies and enjoy them anytime you need to. The fact that this is a very family oriented version of Ghostbusters doesn't ruin anything. I hate when people do that. They go, this ruined my childhood. It's like, well, then you're just too fucking fragile, pal. You're fine. Your childhood's still there in a steel book on your shelf. Like you're good. Like you don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's get into spoilers now as we get ready for categories. And so if you haven't seen Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, it is in theaters right now. It's going to open number 1, so I imagine the biggest majority of our audience has probably seen it already because it's that kind of movie. You typically will go to see this one on opening weekend. Patrick, as I said, this is a movie that, as I keep repeating myself here and saying this sounds like a backhanded compliment, this movie's good enough. They, of course, introduce another world-killing god, a world-wrecking god. And the stakes in this one, even though it's a world-wrecking god, the stakes feel a little smaller. And that's kind of goes back to my original conversation about this feeling like a mid-season TV episode versus like a finale. Nothing wrong with that. Again, doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's a little different. But the world-killing god, like, they took a while to get there. Now, one thing I want to say, we mentioned like all the story and timing and everything. This movie clocked in an hour and 55 minutes. Totally fine. Didn't feel bloated.
No.
Considering all the stories and characters they had to inject in there, didn't feel overly bloated. Here's where I say, I almost weirdly wish they had given like another 15 minutes or 20 minutes of building the bad guy, because when Vigo, you see Vigo in that painting in Ghostbusters 2, and you just get a sense right away of something creepy and off about that painting. And then, of course, when he's finally fully realized, it's a much more powerful ghost. Same thing with Zool and Gozer in the first one, and even Afterlife, when you realize that it's the followers of Gozer. We're in this Oklahoma town, and this is where they're back to where they're at now. The world-wrecking god, the ice god, for lack of a better way of terminology, doesn't feel all that threatening through a lot of this movie. And I wonder if, because it's like so family-friendly, they're like, we got to get this thing under 2 hours. I just recently watched the Roadhouse remake. Not to get off subject here, Patrick. I watched the Roadhouse remake on Amazon. It's 2 hours and 1 minute long. It's about 40 minutes too long. I think it can be shaved down to an hour and 20 minutes. You wouldn't skip a beat. I'm going to be honest, there's probably going to be people listening to this podcast that I listen for horror. I don't listen for your Roadhouse review, Damon. I'm just going to tell you, the movie's awful. It's a terrible terrible movie. It's a really bad remake. It's a really. But I turned it on late. I watched it late because it popped on Thursday. I watched it late Wednesday night because I wanted to write my review for it. I work for mixed martial arts. Conor McGregor's in the movie. Not getting too far off subject, but I was going to write my review on Thursday, but I needed to watch it when it first came out on Wednesday night. So I started the movie and I pressed play and it said 2 hours and 4 minutes. That's with all the credits. I was like, 2 hours and 4 minutes for Roadhouse? I was like, what is going on here? And when it was over, I was like, you could have cut 35 minutes out of that movie and you would not have missed a beat. This movie, actually, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, feels like it could have been about 15 minutes longer. They could have injected a little bit more of the foreboding, apocalyptic nature of this ice god. And people are like, dude, stop saying it. I'm saying it again. It's fine. I just feel like the stakes could have been raised a little higher.
That key words there, Damon, the stakes. Because there's so many different avenues to run down in Frozen Empire, the stakes get a little bit lost. Like, you get into the story of it, and they're in basically this god is a Granaka, I think it is. If I'm not getting it wrong. Yeah, it is Granaka, right?
Is that Banaka? Like the
Ganaka. Yeah, not like Banaka, but Ganaka. So Ganaka's this god, and it's intrinsically tied actually to Camille Nanjiani's character, Nadim. he had this relic in his house, and he lived with his grandma, and his grandma passed away, and he's just trying to hawk her stuff for money. And so he goes to raise a cult with the orb, and he's like, I got this thing. It looks like it's worth something, right? And Ray immediately recognized it, being an occult expert, going, that's like a serious, that might be like encasing some sort of a big ghost. Well, okay, great. And then they really get into a little bit of the history. There's even a cold open that takes place, I think, in the early 1900s, with a an adventurers club that has unlocked this god, and it froze all the guys, and it kind of reminded me of True Detective this season. The ice, the corpsicles, you know, like they're all frozen in place. It's a kind of a decent and creepy little moment in this movie. But once that's kind of established, then you got to jump to the A story, which is really just about Phoebe being frustrated that she's not allowed to be a professional Ghostbuster because she's underage. So she's pissed about that. And she's mad at her family because they're basically telling her, like, you're a kid and this gets dangerous. So we need you to back off it a little bit. Like, you just need to back off it a little bit. And so she's kind of going through a teen angsty phase in her life where she's like, fuck my parents. They're fucking assholes. And nobody gets me, and I didn't mind it, but like, that's the A story. The A story is that. And so if the A story is I'm a teen and I want to be a Ghostbuster, I'll just go ghost bust on my own then, I guess, which is what happens in a lot of teen coming of age type movies. That happens. You miss out on the grand stakes. The grand stakes should be this Ganaka character. And like why they must stop Ganaka. You know, some people are hot and cold on Ghostbusters 2. I love Ghostbusters 2. I saw it in the theater when it came out. It's highly nostalgic for me. As a kid, I remember being terrified that Vigo was going to kill little Oscar. He was going to take little Oscar and use his body to be born again. That's stakes. That's scary, right? Dana's child is being kidnapped by this Vigo character. That's stakes. Okay, is it the scariest movie in the world? No. There's a lot of dread in that. There's a lot, and you can sympathize, even when young me, however old I was, 10, 11 years old, going like, don't let Vigo get that baby. Like that enough is just, that's enough to latch you on and make you feel the stakes. Ganaka's like, I'm going to freeze the whole world and everybody's going to die. And that's just happening like way back here in the background somewhere. While Ray Stantz is like, hey man, I want to Ghostbust again. I know I'm getting too old. And then there's like this research lab, and then there's the Patton Oswalt character, and there's the Kumail character, and they all have storylines you have to go back to. So the stakes of Ganaka are completely lost.
Yeah, he kind of becomes the background character, and when he's supposed to be like the big bad, and that's kind of that's why I think it feels like a great middle of the season episode. Like, oh, okay, here's this god, and the stakes. Like when you think about the original Ghostbusters with Gozer, and these were Gozer worshippers, and this was like an ancient cult of people who worshipped him. And then the cult kind of died, and years later it kind of revives itself, and that's when Gozer reforms, and you know, we meet Zool and all that, and it's the stakes are, you know, this ancient Sumerian god wants to take over, but the way they kind of laid the groundwork for where it came from, this ancient cult and everything, it kind of made sense, and it was a grand scale at the end with the big battle at the very end with the Ghostbusters and the god. And that also produced one of the greatest all-time Ghostbusters lines when she says, "Are you a god?" And they say no, and he says, "When they ask you if you're a god, you say yes." And then you talk about Vigo in the second one with, you know, basically possessing Oscar as a little child so he could be reborn into this world and bring misery and, you know, basically take over the world in a reborn human form. That's pretty terrifying, especially when you inject a child like a baby. You know, we're talking about like a 9 or 10-month-old baby.
Yeah.
This film, by the time it kind of raises the stakes, when there's a weird subplot, as you mentioned, with Phoebe being a little bummed that she's been sidelined because she's 15 and they can't work anymore, and she ends up befriending a ghost named Melody, who kind of shows up to her one night. She's playing chess in the park by herself, feeling very mopey and emo. and this ghost shows up, and the ghost is like, "Aren't you scared?" And she's like, "This is my job, chill. Like, you're not gonna scare me."
You're not even a scary ghost.
Yeah, and so they kind of become friends, and then you kind of come to find out later on that this Melody character, the ghost, was more or less an acolyte of Ganaka, and the ice god can control ghosts. It's like this thing has the power to control ghosts, and so this ghost god has made Melody more or less manipulate Phoebe so she can use her powers as the access to the Ghostbusters to eventually free the god who's living in this orb. His power's limited when he's in this orb. He can kind of breach out a little bit. He can kind of branch out. He can't do full on Ganaka shit. He has to basically, very, very. If you're gonna make the stakes raised, why not make it that? This is a god that can control ghosts. That's pretty terrifying when you think about it.
Yeah.
They're not just serving him. He literally is like snaps his finger and they're like running around doing whatever he tells them to. That's pretty terrifying. But because there's so many other layers to the story, by the time you get to Ganaka and you get to the grand finale, the last 30 minutes where he's trying to transform the world into an ice planet, you're like, okay, it's fun. It's action adventure. I get it. But the stakes never feel that high. I never feel like, oh my God, the world is ending. This is all going to go away. These Ghostbusters need to save the world. That's where I go back to this feels like a mid-season episode. Oh, this is a ghost we got to bust. It's a bad guy. Let's put him in a containment unit and move on to our next job. That's kind of the stake. So, keep saying this, Patrick. It's perfectly fine. It's good enough. I enjoyed it. But if you're going in thinking this is going to be another grand, giant Ghostbusters movie, you're going to be a little disappointed because it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel big. It doesn't feel grand. It feels good. And you know what?
Yeah.
I know I say this, I've said this a couple of times, but I'm being honest when I say this. Like, sometimes good is good enough.
Oh, yeah. Like, it was still a fun night at the movies. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. I was telling my brother, who absolutely adored this movie. He really, really loved it. Like, the mistake I think they made was that they didn't make Ganaka a human. Now, and what I mean by that is, Gozer, or was it Gozer or Zool? It was a physical form, like an actor on the set with everybody. Vigo was a physical form, was a man. Ganaka's like a CG character, and you see it in the trailer. I go, why didn't they make Ganaka a person? Because then you have to make them a character. What I knew about Vigo and what I understood about Vigo, even through most of the time he was working through Janusz, the actor, which was funny, and it was a funny dynamic. But what you learned about Vigo, here I am I'm in defense of Vigo. Vigo was he was a barbarian conqueror, and what he wanted was absolute devastation, suffering, and pain in the world, and he made that clear. Like, he talked about it because he was a character. He had to talk about what his intentions were. Ganaka was just like this being that this ethereal being that just kind of floated around. It said a couple of lines here and there. But if you made it a character, and believe me, there's plenty of characters in this movie, you could have taken one out and given Ganaka some time to explain Ganaka's motivation. I think it would have made it stronger, because I knew what Vigo wanted. Vigo wanted a world of suffering and pain and blood and bodies stacked high. Like, you knew what he wanted. Ganaka wants to make the whole place frozen. Like, okay. Is that supposed to be scary? I don't know. Like, it's kind of hot. Global warming is a problem, right? So, like, if you want everything to cool down, that doesn't actually sound that bad. But it's because there was no character there to really to create the stakes for you. You didn't understand Ganaka's motivation. It was being filtered through just visuals and even the Melody Ghost. For the most part, the Melody Ghost just wanted to be friends with Phoebe and wanted to see her family. She was kind of like trapped in the middle. Like, that was her storyline, was like, I'm trapped in this middle place, and I kind of like you, Phoebe, because, like, you treat me well. Everybody else is just scared of me. In fact, that's how Phoebe no, Phoebe meets Melody yet again when they call the Ghostbusters to bust a ghost, and it turns out to be Melody, but they've already met. So she realizes Melody kind of lives in this world where people don't like her because she's a ghost, but Phoebe treats me nice. So that's a story, by the way. That's F story or G story or whatever the hell story it is. And so we get more of that than we get of Ganaka. And even though she's like, well, I'm being controlled by Ganaka, it doesn't really feel like it. Melody's sort of like another teen, angsty, indifferent ghost. So she just kind of is a mirror of Phoebe. She doesn't make the stakes seem any greater at all.
Yeah, I think that's because again, when you're dealing with the stakes of a world ending or a world controlling demon, deity, god, whatever you want to say it, you can only go back to that well so many times. They did it in the first one. The second one was a little different because it was a man who was a barbarian conqueror. They had that one of my favorite parts of that movie is when he reads off all the different ways they had to finally how they killed Vigo back in the day, and he's like he was disemboweled, all this stuff, and Vigo gets, and finally after 160 years or whatever, Vigo goes, well, he hung in there, didn't he? But like Vigo was Vigo the Carpathian was a cruel, brutal dictator, and he wanted to become a cruel, evil dictator again. So you understood his motivations, and then Afterlife went back to the well for the first film, which again I have no problem with that because we already established Gozer was a Sumerian god. He had worshippers, and they were still worshippers to this day. Okay, fine with that. The problem with Ganaka is that it's just he wants to freeze the world. For what purpose? Like, they explain at one part that he served an ancient king, and the king kind of turned on him, and so he got angry and like lashed out. Okay, I guess that's fine.
Sure.
Do you remember? This is another comparison. You remember not the original, the Mummy remake, the Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz remake from like '98, whatever year that came out. Fantastic movie. One of the best like action adventure horror tinged films of the past 50 years. I love The Mummy. What I love about The Mummy is that the stakes are big, but they're also small. Because the Mummy itself, played by Arnold Vosloo, he's ultimately trying to resurrect his ancient love, the woman who was married to the Pharaoh's wife that he fell in love with, that they betrayed the Pharaoh and killed the Pharaoh. He was ultimately trying to do that. Now, he also had these world-conquering plagues that he could use at his disposal, which he's going to basically end the world at the same time. But ultimately, his motivation was bringing his dead, the love of his life back to life, to resurrected his wife. That was really his motivation beyond the world-destroying stuff. Then when they got into part two, which is when the story starts falling apart, is they just try to do it again. They literally just try to do the same thing again. And then they inject the weird Scorpion King and the Rock, and it wasn't good because you literally just try to do the same thing in a different direction, and it just felt forced and wasn't great. It was okay, and don't even get me started on the third one, whatever. But the second one's just like, okay, we're gonna rehash and do this again, slightly differently. Now his resurrected girlfriend is gonna bring him back to the dead, and they're gonna conquer. It's just again they redid it. I feel like if there would have been a little bit more originality surrounding Ganaka, what his motivation was beyond I just want to freeze the world, I think it would have felt bigger. And maybe that bigger is as something like The Mummy, where he wants to resurrect his ancient princess, but he also wants to end the world. It's that balance where you understand like why he's angry, you understand why he's vengeful, what he's going for. This is literally just like, oh, he's a really bad god. They locked him away, and after all these hundreds of years, he wants out to freeze the world. It's not bad. Mm-hmm. It's not bad. But there's no emotional stakes to it. And again, that's probably my biggest issue with the villain in this movie is like, he really does feel like the F story. Like he's supposed to be at worst the B story because he's the big villain. He's like the F story in this one.
He should have been the B story. Like 100% should have been the B story. Would be like, his motivation for wanting to take over the world. Maybe his motivation was like actually something more, not even world ending. It was just like, I want this one ghost back, my love, right? She's trapped in that thing the Ghostbusters have. So I need her back. And then he finds out that he can't get her back, and that sends him into a frenzy. And he's like, "Fine, then I'll freeze the world. I'll my cold dead heart. The world will become my cold dead heart. You know, something to that effect. But if you don't make him a person that can act in the room, then it's just this big ethereal thing that's happening in the background, and it feels very much like it's happening in the background. And even when it starts happening, when that final sequence starts happening in the movie, you're sort of like, oh, like at what point did it start working? Like it just doesn't have the impact because it started working back in like the C or D story. You're like, oh, okay, it wasn't up near the surface where all the other good stuff was.
Remember in the first one, and they actually revisited in this one, which I did enjoy. In the first one, when the Ghostbusters are first trying to like prove that there are ghosts and they are paranormal investigators, they are called to a library. There's a ghost in the library. Everybody knows about it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that great thing where even in that we talk about the adult humor in that line where he's asking Vinkman's asking the librarian questions, and she says, "Are you menstruating?" And the library administrator goes, "What does that matter?" He goes, "Back off, man. I'm a scientist." When they go in the basement and they run into the ghost and they're all talking amongst themselves, like, what do we do? What do we do? And Ray's like, I got a plan. And he goes, get her. And then the thing freaks out and screams. They all go running out of there. Then that also produces one of my all-time favorite Ghostbusters lines. Get her. That was your plan, Ray. Get her. There's no stakes there. It's just a ghost in a basement. We don't know why the ghost is there. We assume it's a librarian from whatever year died there, and they forever haunt this library. That ghost makes an appearance again in this movie, which is funny. I did enjoy that.
Yeah.
But that's just the stakes. We don't know what this ghost is. We don't know what their motivation is. It's just a ghost in a library. Expand that to being Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. That's kind of what this feels like. Like, there's no motivation besides, I want to freeze the world. It's not bad. Like, I love that scene in the library. That library scene is one of my favorite scenes in the original Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
But it's also part of a larger building block to get you to Gozer, to get you to where the Ghostbusters are real. You know, it's like in Ghostbusters 2, when they're investigating the slime underneath the city and they get pulled into court, and you have that abusive dick of a judge who's just, he's like, you are charlatans, you are fakers, you are whatever. And he's just like, I want to reach back to a purer time and have you burned at the stake. And then boom, these two ghosts, the Scoleri brothers, come out. And they're going after the judge because he sentenced them to death. They both got the chair, and now they're coming back for vengeance. It's not a big story. It's a very minor, like, oh, they're ghosts coming after this judge who condemned them to death, and they are dead. Very minor. But that's not the A story. That's not, the Scoleri brothers are not the big bads in Ghostbusters 2. That's kind of what, like, Ganaka ultimately felt like the library ghost, kind of like the Scoleri brothers. Good enough. It's a good part of the movie, but it just didn't feel like Gozer. It didn't feel like Vigo. No. That's where I'm kind of coming from with this.
Yeah. I mean, it's just that I think it would have been solved if you'd put a human actor in that role. I think it would have made all the difference. Which is, by the way, a great argument against AI actors. Like, look what happens when you make something completely out of CG. It just feels lifeless and it falls into the background. And that's exactly what happened with Ganaka.
It felt a little too cartoonish, you know, and there's just like, there's no stakes when it's just that. Like, you know,
yeah, it's an episode of Scooby-Doo, and yeah, totally.
Yeah, exactly. Except there's no unmasking the bad guy. It's just, oh, it's a ghost. Okay.
Now let's see who Ganaka really is. Yeah. Oh, it was Sigourney Weaver this whole time.
You meddling kids. I told you not to come after me. Let's get into categories, and we're going to kick things off as we do each and every week here on the show, and we are going to talk about best performance. To be clear, Patrick, once again, I know I say this on a lot of episodes, there were no bad performances necessarily, but what was your favorite performance in Ghostbusters Frozen Empire?
I had to give it this time to McKenna Grace, who plays Phoebe Spengler. It is her movie. She is the A story of many, many stories. And she plays that sort of angsty teen, that teen that thinks they know everything. She's doing it really well in this movie. And I just had to give her credit because she's alongside a bunch of other great veteran actors. So to stand out in this movie is actually kind of tough. And I thought she did a good job.
What I liked about her performance is in the first film, she's like the nerdy loner kid who wants to be nerdy loner kid, and she's very much her grandfather's granddaughter. She's a scientist. She doesn't really want friends. She just wants to study and be a good scientist.
Yeah.
When they age her to 15 now, she's very much, they know she's the smart one in the room, but now she can't participate because she's too young. And so she gets to play the angsty, emo-ish teen, which she really didn't get to play in the first one. So I thought it showed her range really well.
Yeah, and she gets a friend in Melody, right? And and she has this dynamic with her. It was a little bit of a coming out party, I think, for McKenna Grayson. This one, I mean, I thought she was actually great in Afterlife too, and very much for those same reasons. Like it was just she was basically just Egon again. Like, but now she's working on this new level. So when Gil Kennan says, "Hey, this is the Phoebe trilogy," good, because she's doing a good job carrying these movies.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, for best performance, I could have gone down a couple of different routes. It was great to see Dan Aykroyd back. He had a lot more to chew on in this movie. I really enjoyed they gave Ernie Hudson a bigger role because I think he's kind of like the criminally underused part of the Ghostbusters franchise because he was never the scientist. He just kind of came in and worked for them. But ultimately, I gave best performance in this movie to none other than the great Kumail Nanjiani, who plays Nadim, the keeper of the orb. As we come to find out, he is known as the fire starter. His grandmother was the protector of this orb who was meant to protect this orb and keep it from ever escaping. But her kind of lazy layabout grandson isn't worried about carrying on the family tradition. He just wants to make a quick buck by selling off his grandma's shit. Kumail Nanjiani is a very funny actor. I watched Silicon Valley for every season. He is hilarious. And if you've ever seen the movie, oh God, what is it called? The one he wrote basically about his real life. Him and his wife.
Yeah, it's a funny, good movie.
Get Sick. Yeah, it was the Big Sick. The Big Sick.
The Big Sick. Yeah,
really funny movie. There is a lot of humor in this movie. It's ultimately it's a sci-fi horror comedy, for lack of a better terminology. They gave almost every really funny moment in this movie to Kumail Nanjiani. And I'm not complaining about that. I'm just saying, like, he was the heartbeat of the comedy in this movie. He had so many funny one-liners delivered brilliantly. I like him in general, but, like, they really let him kind of lead the comedy. Like, they know he's a great comedic actor. And, of course, Bill Murray is one of the greatest comedic actors of all time. But it's almost like he passed the torch to Kumail Nanjiani in this movie. They let him kind of like Bill Murray walked so Kumail Nanjiani could run in this movie.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, Kumail's one of those guys, like I remember loving him when I didn't even really know who he was back in Portlandia. Like he would just pop up and he would be like a little side character in Portlandia. He just is one of these habitual scene stealers. He just knows how to do it. He knows how to steal a scene. And so you're right. Whenever the comedy came up in this movie, and again, Paul Rudd's in this movie. Paul Rudd is a hilarious guy. Kumail was just the funniest person in the room. Anytime he was in the room, he could outshine anybody. So that's a good pick because it's tough in a room full of the Bill Murrays and Paul Rudds of the world to go. Yeah, Kumail is actually the funniest person here. Patton Oswalt, another one, a very funny guy who's in this movie. Kumail outshines him. I mean, the guy's very talented, very, very funny.
Yeah, I really liked him in this movie. Let's move on to our next category, which, by the way, it is named after the great Ken Foray, our Ken Foray MVP, Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP award, named after great character actor in horror films Ken Foray, who once saved the world in From Beyond wearing nothing more than a thong bikini, which, by the way, I want to give a shout out. I did go to Horror Hound this past weekend in Cincinnati, my hometown. Horror Hound was down there. They were kind enough to credential me for the event as media. Great event. Huge shout out to those folks. Super nice. Had a blast down there. I actually got to see Ken Foray down there. I didn't quite have the stones to walk up to him and show him the clip of him running down the stairs in a bikini and say, "We named an award after you, man." I did get to meet the Queen, Barbara Crampton, which I was very, very excited about that. That was one of a lifetime achievement for me to finally meet Barbara Crampton. I also got to meet the entire cast of the Blair Witch Project, which was awesome. They don't ever do appearances, so I got to meet all of them. Had a great conversation with Josh Leonard, talking to him down there. So incredible time. Thank you to Horror Hound for credentialing me and let me cover that event. It was a great time down there. Blast. Had a good time. Always recommend Horror Hound if you're ever in the area where they're doing an event or you want to travel to Cincinnati where they primarily do events. I would highly recommend it. But for me, so the Ken Frey MVP award, going full circle back to that, I'll go first on this one. And my MVP goes to two people, actually. And
Oh,
it's Gil Kennan and Jason Reitman. And the reason why I give them the MVP award is this. Ultimately, Ghostbusters was a vision created by Dan Aykroyd and then crafted by Harold Ramis, because the original Ghostbusters was way different than the movie they actually made.
right.
But Ivan Reitman was the director, and it was his baby. Now, Ivan Reitman directed a lot of movies, but that was one of his babies, was Ghostbusters, and of course Ghostbusters 2. When they announced Ghostbusters Afterlife, and they said Jason Reitman, who has become a fantastic filmmaker in his own right, was taking over for his dad, and he was going to resurrect the Ghostbusters. And not to keep going back to that one, but we loved it. The fact that Jason Reitman is still shepherding this ship, even with his dad gone and him not being able to direct this movie, it was Gil Kennan, his friend and longtime collaborator, who directed this, but he co-wrote it. The fact that this hasn't been handed off to just somebody else to just make a Ghostbusters movie, which I'm not saying somebody couldn't do it well. I think there's probably plenty of filmmakers who could make a really good Ghostbusters film. But this is a family business with these guys. The Reitman family loves and cherishes the Ghostbusters franchise. And for all the little minor complaints that you and I have about Ganaka and the 9 different B stories and all the characters, these are all, again, we've said it very openly, very minor complaints. They have become the keepers of the flame, so to speak. And they've been very honest. They want to do a third one. They want to complete the Phoebe Spengler trilogy. I appreciate that, because you and I both know there's a money grab version of this where it's not nearly as good. They just throw in the Ghostbusters for the hell of it. And maybe Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd don't even want to come back for it because they're like, this isn't our Ghostbusters. I think this was lightning in a bottle, that you had the Reitman family. They were able to get everybody back twice now and hopefully for a third time. And I want to give them the MVP award for the Reitman family, but also Gil Kennan, who was a co-writer on Afterlife as well, that they've kind of become the keepers of the flame of this franchise, and they want to keep it going. They're not like, a lot of times, you know how it goes, Patrick, when you're a franchise filmmaker, eventually the Russo brothers want to make something other than Avengers films. I'll be honest, I've not really seen a lot from the Russo brothers, which has been great so far since they stopped making Avengers films, but they wanted to move on. Robert Downey Jr. wanted to do something other than play Iron Man. Guess what happened? He won a freaking Oscar.
Yeah.
It happens. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate that everyone has a creative vision they want to move on from. But the fact that the Reitman family and now Gil Kennan have kind of continued to shepherd this franchise on, and it sounds like they're going to continue to shepherd this franchise on, I love that.
That's a really good point, actually. Is that I think we should cherish the Jason Reitman era of Ghostbusters, because he did put his own spin on it, his own language on it. We talked about that in Afterlife. It's a Jason Reitman movie that exists in the Ghostbusters universe, if that makes any sense to people. Like, he does a different kind of indie, smaller, more emotionally charged movie, and that's what Afterlife was. And to some extent, I think that's what Frozen Empire is as well. It's just not smaller; it's bigger. And then if we get this trilogy, which I hope we do, that might be the last time that it stays in the family. Because don't kid yourself, when Jason Reitman has moved way on, Sony, I think it's Sony that has it right now, will not be moving on from Ghostbusters and going, well, okay, we did it. They'll go, okay, well, Jason doesn't want to do this, so who does? Michael Bay hasn't been doing anything lately. What do you, Michael Bay, you want to do Ghost? Then they'll do a reboot, and we've had a reboot of Ghostbusters, which I know is to mixed reviews. I didn't hate the Ghostbusters reboot. It was from an era when I think you just had to riff on comedy, and it was a comedy riff and not a lot of story. And I think that's what ultimately failed for that movie. But a reboot is coming somewhere down the line, 100%. So enjoy this little trilogy that is literally in the family, literally from Ivan Reitman to Jason Reitman, from Harold Ramis to these people, like the spirit of their stuff is still in these movies. So, like, hold them sacred, hold them as part of canon, or however you want to, justify it in your brain, because we will be moving on from this at some point. At some point, the Ghostbusters is going to look completely different, and it's going to keep going. It's not going anywhere. Trust me when I tell you, it's not going anywhere. But we are in the Jason Reitman era of the Ghostbusters movies, and it's a nice thing. These have been enjoyable films.
Absolutely. So who do you have for MVP in Ghostbusters Frozen Empire?
My MVP goes to one of the actors, because we used to have a category called favorite character, and I expanded it to MVP so that way we could reach out to people like Jason Reitman, people who are actually helping it. But it was a character in the movie this time, and that was Paul Rudd. Everybody loves Paul Rudd, right? He's the next generation's Tom Hanks. He's a nice guy. He's a good guy. This was, to me, one of his most dynamic roles. Like the way Jason Reitman and Gil Kenan wrote this. He is a nice guy in the movie. He's a completely nice guy, but he's also now taking on the role of sort of stepfather, which he has never had to do. And Carrie Coon's character is like, hey, you need to start getting tough with them. You can't just be the nice, boyfriend, my nice boyfriend. If you're going to be part of this family, sometimes as a parent, you got to be an asshole. And so his C storyline was like, how do I become their dad and not just their buddy? Because that's not working, and I need to change my dynamic with them. So I liked what they gave Paul Rudd in this movie. I thought he handled it well in the moments where he had to kind of put the hammer down as dad, and he did it. And it's still like, it cut him to his core, because he just wants to be nice. He doesn't want to be, he doesn't want to be too rough on them, but he realizes what he needs to do is he needs to step up and be a father too. So I liked that storyline, and I like what Paul Rudd did with it. He's always so charming and funny, and it's no different in this movie.
Yeah, this is a Paul Rudd performance, and I don't mean that in an insult. I mean, like, he just kind of like he knows his lane, and he excels in it pretty much every single time. Now, I think sometimes people don't give Paul Rudd credit for how good he can be, because he does kind of fall into that like nice guy, everybody loves me role. Like, there's part of me that would love to see, like, this is gonna sound weird to say this, but like, there's part of me that would love to make like a new like serial killer movie like Seven, except now instead of Kevin Spacey, it's Paul Rudd. Like, show that he can actually act and not give you range, because he's actually a good actor, but we don't see that as much these days in terms of like range. Like, he kind of plays a similar-ish character in a lot of the films. He's kind of like the comedic, good guy. Nothing wrong with that. Certainly nothing wrong with that. And he does it really well in this movie. And his character is kind of like the glue in a way, because he's like the teacher, as you said, who wants to be the buddy, but he's now having to learn, like, I'm a father, like, I'm a stepfather. He has a great line at the end, too, where when they save the day and they meet him and says, we're the Spengler family. And, of course, his name's not Spengler. And he's like, trust me, you don't want to be a Gruberson. And I was like, that's pretty funny. Like, that's his last, Gary Gruberson. He's like, trust me, you don't want to be a Gruberson. He's great. He's great. It's Paul Rudd. Like I said, he's the picture of consistency.
Yeah, exactly. He delivers what you're looking for, but he does it in the Paul Rudd way, which makes it really enjoyable.
Absolutely. Let's move on to best scare. Now, gotta be honest, not a lot of scares in this movie. There's a couple little jumps and jolts here and there, but it's, again, a very family-friendly film. So you're not going to get kids peeing in their seats in this one, or probably should they. So, Patrick, what was your best scare in Ghostbusters Frozen Empire?
My best scare actually came in the cold open, which we talked about a little bit earlier, which is back in the 1900s, this adventurers club in New York City. The firefighters find it completely frozen over, and all these guys are in there, and they're all frozen in place. And then when one of the firefighters goes to touch the frozen guy, he explodes and breaks. And just that explosion was like really jarring and jumpy. I was like, oh, I wasn't ready for that kind of scare right now in this movie. It just got me at the right time. And honestly, more so than anything, it's kind of like my double MVP. Those exploding people, it's practical. I actually watched a whole featurette on it. They made them molds, and they made them out of special polymers and stuff, so that when you touch them, they would like pull like a pneumatic and have the ice sculptures collapse. So people might have thought, oh, they did that with CG or something. No, like, they really did it. This is actually a practical effects heavy movie for the most part. And that was one of those scenes, and it was kind of a scare that kind of got me.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I really actually liked the opening scene. The cold open was great, and I think that kind of speaks to what we complained about a little bit ago. And again, minor complaint, but how the bad guy in this movie, really didn't feel big enough. The cold open was great. It set the stage for what could have been a much better version of the bad guy. It just didn't really pay off in that way. But the cold open's great, and that scene with the exploding Iceman was fantastic. So I agree, that was really, really well done. My best scare, again, minor, not going to make you jump out of your seat by any stretch of the imagination, but, and it's not even really a jump scare. It's just more of like that you don't want to see something bad happen to somebody.
Hmm.
There's a later part in the movie when Melody, the ghost who has befriended Phoebe, betrays her. And, and you realize that you realize that Melody is working with Ganaka, and they have this machine, this scientific center that Winston has built to better understand ghosts and ghost busting. He's built this machine that can separate an evil spirit from an object, almost like, taking the possessed spirit out of Annabelle the doll kind of thing. And at one point, Phoebe's like, I want to know what it's like to walk on the ethereal plane, so I'm going to jump in this machine that's completely untested for biological life forms, and I'm going to have it, like, suck my spirit out of me, and I'll be a spirit to walk alongside you, and during that time, until I wake up, and when I wake up, I'll be back to normal, everything will be fine, but until then, I get to be a ethereal ghost with you. And the watching of the betrayal of that, when you realize that this was all orchestrated by Melody, so Ganaka could control Phoebe as a human to speak out the chant that would free him from his prison, I thought that was a pretty good chilling moment. I'm like, damn, because Phoebe, rightfully so, through the first two movies, has been the smartest one in the room. But what they did with this film, which I really enjoyed, is they gave her an emotional element to play with as well. And when you inject emotions into the smartest people in the world, they can make bad decisions. Ultimately, Phoebe makes a really bad decision because she wants a friend. She wants someone to understand and basically cope with what she's coping with. They want her to be sympathetic to what she's going through. And Melody, the ghost, is the only one who seems to be sympathetic to what Phoebe is actually going through right now. And so that scene, while not like inherently like, oh my God, is she going to die, scary, it was just kind of scary in the sense of watching her be betrayed and becoming the weapon that Ganaka uses to free himself.
Yeah, you were a little worried in that moment for Phoebe. It's like, oh no, like the smartest kid around who thinks they know everything, like, is so emotionally immature and had no idea that the wool was being pulled out from under her. And so it's one of those moments where you're like, oh shit, like, is she going to be stuck in the ethereal plane? Is she going to live the rest of her life a class 9 free roaming vapor? Like, that sucks. Like, she's too young. That can't happen to her, right? So yeah, it was one of those moments. There's a couple of moments in this movie that are sort of more harrowing than they are scary. I think this, best harrow might have been the more appropriate category, because you're like, oh, I hope these people like make it okay out of this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to our next category, and this is the best of the OGs, and that is the best of the original Ghostbusters. Of course, everybody from the original Ghostbusters comes back, minus, sadly, of course, Harold Ramis. And let's just throw in an honorary mention to Sigourney Weaver. You didn't bring her back.
No, Sigourney.
Patrick, who is your favorite of the old G's, the OGs, the old Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters?
Yeah, I decided to put this category in because they were used way more than I thought. They got their own storyline basically. And I wasn't ready for that. I thought they might have just made a little appearance in this movie. Nope, they're in this movie. They are, Winston and Ray and Venkman. They are very much part of this movie. And so I was like, well, let's set aside some time for them, because indeed they're in this. But I gave it to Ray this time. Now Ray's always, of course, been a big part of the movies. And Dan Aykroyd himself created this idea, so it's really important. But what I really loved about Ray's story this time was the acknowledgement that he is far past his prime, but he still has in him that thrill for the hunt. and I liked that storyline, and I liked how Dan Aykroyd played it. This might have been one of Dan Aykroyd's better roles, like honestly, like he's a great comedy actor, and I can think of a couple of times where I absolutely love him. But this one was where you really sympathized with him. It almost reminded me like one of the only things I liked from that new Dial of Destiny movie, the Indiana Jones one, was when he bumped into his old friend who was helping him start the adventure again. And he's like, I wish I could go with you, but I'm just too old. I don't have the knees to do it anymore. But I thirst for the ocean and for the thrill of adventure. That's Ray in this movie. He's like, I just want one more chance to be a Ghostbuster because I know my time's running out. I loved that, and I think he was the strongest story in the OGs, and so I had to give it to Ray this time.
Ray in this movie really does transform into that mentor role where he's helping Phoebe and the rest of the Spengler family become who they need to become. He's kind of become their bridge because when we meet him in Afterlife, he's given all this up. He's just like, I don't want any part of it anymore. It's just not who I am at this stage of my life. And they bring him back in. And he eventually shows up with the cavalry and they help save the day. In this film, he is very much part of the story from the very beginning. He is, he is an essential piece of the puzzle, even if he's not out with a jumpsuit and a proton pack every day. He is the Splinter to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, for lack of a better. He is the Yoda to this group, and I appreciate that he's taken on that role. But he still wants to be a little bit badass. He still wants to go out there occasionally and kick some ass, and so I really appreciate his role in this movie. And I agree, he was great. And Dan Aykroyd's a criminally underrated, very smart guy, very, very, very good actor in his own right. And I appreciate they kind of put him in that little different role. He has the biggest role of all the Ghostbusters in this movie. And that's because he does play kind of the mentor to the family. So for me, my favorite, of course, I love Bill Murray. I love Dan Aykroyd, but I want to give credit to Ernie Hudson. And my favorite Ghostbuster was Winston Zeddemore because we learned in Ghostbusters Afterlife that Winston is no longer the hired gun. He's no longer the guy coming in and saying, do you believe in ghosts, specters, whatever? He's like, I'll believe whatever you tell me as long as it's got a paycheck. He didn't give a shit what you believed in. Just give me a paycheck. That's all I cared about. And I appreciate that level of capitalism. But in this one, he's now a philanthropist. He's rich, wealthy, beyond his wildest dreams, and he's still committed to helping people through the Ghostbusters. He's now created an entire lab to study ghosts. He funds the firehouse for the Spengler family. He is the heart and soul of the Ghostbusters now, and I appreciate that he's kind of taken on that role because we have to imagine if Harold Ramis didn't pass away, sadly, it's almost like you feel like he would have never let the Ghostbusters truly die after what happened in Ghostbusters 2. But sadly, when Harold Ramis passed away, no one kind of kept that going. And Winston did. Quietly behind the scenes, he always had this passion and love for the Ghostbusters, even though he wasn't the science guy. He had nothing to do with the science part of the investigation. He was just a hired gun in the first two films. The fact that they gave him a much bigger role in this one and made him, in a way, the leader. Like, he's the one spearheading all this. I appreciated that, and I really liked that they gave Ernie Hudson and Winston Zeddemore more to chew on in this movie.
Yeah, and I think his role's even better in this movie than it was in Afterlife. In Afterlife, they sort of explain like the only reason Egon even had this home was because Winston was paying for it. Winston was paying the mortgage because he knew that his time with the Ghostbusters was special, and when he moved on from it, and I think he became like a real estate magnate or something, like a great business magnate. He knew that he had to keep that side of things going because that's where he got his start. His humble beginnings were busting ghosts when no one believed it was possible, when everybody thought they were frauds, when they had to sit in jail. He was there doing it, and when he moved on from it, he didn't become, like some people can kind of become villains of it, right? Like, oh, that was a time in my life. That's one way you could move the story. Instead, he went, no, I'm gonna take my money and keep what I believe is a good thing going because it changed my life, and you get a good feeling for that in Frozen Empire.
Not to keep banging on this drum, but one of my favorite parts of the original film, talking about the adult humor, is when the mayor is trying to understand what the Ghostbusters are telling him, and Winston comes up and he says, Your Honor, I'm not a scientist. I just met these men, but since I have met these three guys, I have seen some shit that would turn your hair white. He's just like the very real person. Like, I don't know if it's real or not, but I have seen some shit you would not believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just love him. He's great. Ernie Hudson's great. Next category. Let's move on to remake, sequel, or leave it alone. This is the category where we take whatever movie we are reviewing and we basically theorize: should they remake it, should they give it a sequel, or should they just leave it alone? I kind of already know the answer to this one. We already talked about it earlier. Just like I'm just gonna say it, it's a sequel because they very openly. Gil Kennan has said they want to make this. At worst, maybe they'll go beyond this, but at worst, they want to do the Phoebe Spangler trilogy, the McKenna Grace trilogy. She has been very much the lead character in both movies. They want to allow her to wrap up that trilogy in a third film. Sequel's the answer, Patrick. Let's just not fool ourselves.
It's an easy sequel. It really is, and for many of the reasons that I talked about in Best Performance, McKenna Grace can hold her own, can hold the movie. She is the anchor of these first two movies. Let her anchor the third one in a big and epic way. And hey, let her face a ghost that is actually an actor or somebody. That would be cool.
Yeah. I think that'd be good. I actually skipped a category and I apologize. Let me go backwards. I meant to go to this one. I went to remake, sequel, or leave it alone. Best ghost. We didn't talk about best ghost. I apologize. I skipped that category. There are a lot of ghosts, a lot of varied ghosts in this movie, which is kind of nice. Kind of get away from just the ghosts, like random ghosts. There actually are ghosts that actually have a little bit more presence in this movie. So, Patrick, what was your favorite ghost in Ghostbusters Frozen Empire?
My favorite ghost is called the Hell's Kitchen Sewer Dragon. Now, who knows? Now, what I love about that is that there's clearly this name for it, which means it has like this long history. And so that's kind of the small window to big world. Like there's something that has gone on with the Hell's Kitchen Sewer Dragon for much longer than these movies, and in the trailer they're actually trying to hunt it down. It's in the middle of it's flying through the middle of Manhattan, and they're trying to capture it. It's just a cool looking ghost. It was very much in the spirit of the original Ghostbusters. Like it has the same look, kind of that bluish tint to it. It felt very much like a ghost from the original Ghostbusters, but I also loved that it had this very specific name that told you there's plenty of history with the Hell's Kitchen Sewer Dragon.
Yeah, I like the Hell's Kitchen Sewer Dragon. It was a great chase sequence to open the film as well. After you get through the cold open, it's basically them chasing the Hell's Kitchen Sewer Demon throughout the air and through the city, and it's a great chase sequence and very harrowing and a great moment with Phoebe, and that's really what leads them into the interaction with Walter Peck, where he says, "Hold on now, like I'm going to shut you down, and I know you got a 15-year-old working for you, so I'm really shutting that down." But that all is predicated on them chasing the sewer dragon throughout New York City.
Yeah.
My favorite ghost. So I almost went Slimer because it was fun to have him back because he's always kind of been like a little bit of comic relief. And when they did the Real Ghostbusters TV cartoon years ago, it was Slimer in the Real Ghostbusters. Like he was a big part of that show.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the one I really liked and the direction they went in this movie is I actually really liked that they brought in this character Melody, the ghost who befriends Phoebe, because throughout these first couple of Ghostbusters, throughout three Ghostbusters films, outside of Vigo, the ghosts don't really talk much. They're just like creatures, more or less.
Yeah.
I like that they basically are saying like this is a person. It's a spirit hasn't crossed over into whatever the other plane of existence is. They are basically stuck in purgatory, which is Earth. This Melody wants to reunite with her family, but she's stuck here until she completes whatever she needs to complete to close off her loop so she can go join her family in the afterlife. They actually made Melody a talking, speaking ghost. And I appreciated it because that is pretty common. I mean, in films and TV, like a talking ghost is pretty normal. That's not really been the norm with Ghostbusters, though. All the Ghostbusters ghosts are creatures. They're like, raw creatures. That's it.
Yeah. They're animalistic.
And the fact that they made this like a real person was pretty interesting. I like that little twist.
Yeah, I think it was good to kind of go, there's just regular ghosts here too. They aren't all just monstrous. Like some of them are just hanging out and hanging around, and that's exactly what Melody was, and she had a personality. She was far more interesting than Ganaka. Can you tell why, Damon? Because it was a person. Like you actually got to like understand them a little bit and understand you knew her motivations. I mean, and that made her kind of villainous because of what she did to Phoebe. It's like you know why she's doing it. She doesn't really want to do it, but she has a clear motivation for why, and it put Phoebe at great risk. But also, like the humanistic element of having her expanded and made the ghost and the ethereal plane much more nuanced.
Yeah, you really in any of the other Ghostbusters movies, you really haven't seen like a human formed ghost outside of like the librarian, of course, and even that transforms into a monster when it attacks Ray
Yeah.
in the library. And outside of that, like in Ghostbusters 2, when the Titanic lands, which is a hilarious part with Cheech Marin, and they're like, the Titanic just landed. He's sitting there all gobsmacked in his face. You see the people coming off the Titanic as it
Yeah.
lands in the ports. But yeah, like typically they're not human ghosts. They're just creatures. They're monsters. And I like that they kind of gave a ghost a personality, which is weird to say, but they did that in this movie. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah, finally.
Exactly. Come on now. All right, last category before we get to our final category. I say last category, there's actually one more, but can we survive this horror film? Patrick, I'm going to answer this one starting out of the gate. Can we survive this horror film? Yes. You know why? Because nobody dies in a Ghostbusters movie.
No.
I'm not saying, like, obviously we know the stakes are raised because of what happened last one. Technically, Egon perished trying to stop Gozer from being reborn. So technically, in Ghostbusters Afterlife, they did kind of hint at the ghost was responsible, at least partially responsible, for what happened to Egon. He was resurrected and he helped save his family, and it's, again, beautiful moment. I wept like a child. But the stakes in the Ghostbusters movie are, we've never truly been to the point where they're like, Vinkman's on life support, he got, beat up by a ghost or what, So,
Right.
yeah, we survived this because nobody really dies in a Ghostbusters movie.
No, nobody dies in Ghostbusters. It actually just seems like a whole lot of fun. Truth be told, it just seems like being a Ghostbuster is a great time. With the occasional world-ending ghost you have to deal with.
Are you trying to say bustin' makes you feel good, Patrick?
Damon, busting makes me feel good.
That was also one of my favorite parts of the movie. They do spoil it in the trailer, which goes back to why I hate trailers so much. But they do. There's a great part where he's trying to convince Carrie Coon's character, who, by the way, I mentioned great performances. I'm a huge Carrie Coon fan. I love her. I adore her from The Leftovers and everything else she's ever been. She's like very much the D story in this movie, but I love her in this movie. But there's a great moment where they're just like, they're done. They're defeated. They're ready to go. And Paul Rudd is trying to convince her to stick around and fight, to fight for the Ghostbusters. And he's like, who are you going to call when there's something strange
in your neighborhood?
Yeah. And he does that. He's like, you know why? And she's like, don't say it. He's like, you know why? He's like, don't say it. Buster makes me feel good.
It is. It is just a great, funny little moment that only Paul Rudd can really deliver something like that. He's sort of the antithesis of Bill Murray. Like Bill Murray has got great crass humor, and Paul Rudd's got like sweet, kind of very, very safe humor, but it's funny nonetheless. He's very unique in that respect.
I love that they just acknowledge there is a Ghostbusters song written by Ray Parker Jr. in the movie. Now they're just full on quoting, like, who are you going to call? Ghostbusters.
By the way, no callback to Bobby Brown's Ghostbuster song, which was fantastic.
Oh, that was a great. Bobby Brown made an appearance in Ghostbusters 2.
Yeah, what a song that was. See, can you survive this horror film? Can you survive not dancing in a Ghostbusters movie because the music's good, because you're having fun, because it's party time, excellent, the whole thing, dude.
Real quick before we get to our last category, did you see the homage to Ghostbusters 2 in the lab? The lab that Winston built. Did you catch the nugget? The little nugget they threw in there?
Was it the pink slime?
Yeah, did you see that?
Yeah, I saw the pink slime.
They have the
jugs.
Yeah, they have no. There's a chamber set up in there where they do experimentation, and there's a scene real briefly where you see a guy standing there and a woman has one of the slime cannons and she's blasting him with the slime.
I did see that. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, what a nice little twist to show just a little Easter egg to part 2. I thought that was cool.
I'm not done with Vigo. Maybe that's part 3 because we know Vigo's a bad man. So let's bring Vigo back. We brought Gozer back. We brought Zool back. Let's bring Vigo back for the third one.
Sadly, the actor who played Vigo passed away though. So
it's okay. Well, we could do something else. We can bring Vigo back.
They got Olivia Wilde to randomly play Gozer.
I know. I didn't even know it was her.
Yeah, I love Olivia Wilde. Bring her back. Bring her back. Can you bring her back anyways? Just
Can
because?
she
Like,
can she play Vigo? I'm
yeah,
okay with that. I'm okay with
yeah,
her playing Vigo.
yeah. Bring back Olivia Wilde to do anything. I'm fine with that. Just saying.
But busting makes me feel good. What can I
That's
say?
exactly. Last category. Listen, let's be honest. I mean, I'm gonna let you answer this first, but is it scary? Come on. Is it
No, come
scary?
on. No, Ghostbusters is fun for the whole family. Like bring everybody to the party. We love Ghostbusters. It's not scary, but it's not supposed to be. But is it Ghostbuster movie? Yes, it is. It's 100% a Ghostbuster movie that I think is going to bring you back to what makes what at the heart of the Ghostbusters franchise is so great, which is like kind of the familial, the family getting together and taking on ghosts. That's exactly what you get in this movie. You get a lot of different things in this movie, a lot of stories in this movie. It's a lot, but it all comes back to like, we're a team and we're going to go after ghosts. You get that very much in Ghostbusters Frozen Empire.
It's not scary, but it's fun. And that's really what it's meant to be. Like I said, we kind of joked about, like, could we survive this film? Yes, because nobody dies in a Ghostbusters film because they're not really supposed to. You don't really, it would be a really dark movie if, like, Venkman got shanked by an ice shard from the guy. Like, Ganaka just stabs him in the heart. We're like, what is going on here? What is happening, Ghostbusters? Like, you just shanked Venkman in the shower. What's going on?
Well, see, that would have raised the stakes. We could have used that in this movie.
Yeah, but no, it's not scary, but it's not meant to be scary. It's a fun, as you said, it's a fun family ghost story, sci-fi adventure horror comedy. Because you're dealing with ghosts, there is a horror element in there. I think that has to be.
Oh yeah.
When you're dealing with a world conquering god, that's supposed to be scary. It's not, but it's supposed to be scary. So yeah, I mean, it's a fun movie. I think sometimes I feel like when I read reviews, which I don't ever read reviews till after I see a movie, which sounds weird because you're supposed to read them before you see a movie. I don't like anything being spoiled for me, but I read them afterwards. And I've read a couple because if you look at Rotten Tomatoes, the review website, this film has like 43% from critics, but like 84% from audiences. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of this as well because I write reviews on top of doing them on the show. I think sometimes you take yourself a little too seriously when you write a review. And I'm not saying the reviewers who reviewed this and didn't love it gave it like a bad review because they didn't understand it or they're just whatever. But like I feel like sometimes reviewers overthink things. This is Ghostbusters. It's not supposed to be, this elaborate Oppenheimer freaking plot.
Yeah,
like
it's not Killers of the Flower Moon. Like it's Ghostbusters.
Yeah. So I'm not saying they're wrong. You're certainly entitled to your opinion, but like don't overthink it. It's Ghostbusters.
Yeah, just let it be Ghostbusters. It'll be fine. Like you'll be good, And I think at the end of the day, you and I are saying it. Go see this movie. Go see it in the theater. Go see it in a packed house. Take the kids. It's that kind of movie, and you're gonna have fun with it.
And people are still loving this. I saw it on Friday night. I didn't see it actually on Thursday. I saw it on Friday night, and my theater was packed.
Mine too.
Packed to the gills. And I had one of the I have a theater in my town that's not IMAX, but it's like an ultra screen is what they call it. It's basically IMAX without calling it IMAX. And the theater was packed. I mean, it was packed to the brim on a Friday night. So I think this film's going to do very well. And there's a very good chance we're going to get a conclusion to the Phoebe Spangler trilogy.
I hope so.
What I'm saying. So there you go. All right, folks, that is our episode. Now, as I mentioned on last week's podcast, there is like a string of new horror films coming out, and Ghostbusters is clearly the biggest this weekend because it's going to be the number one at the box office, so we had to tackle that first. I can go ahead and preview our next episode because we are going to be tackling the new Sydney Sweeney-led horror film Immaculate. Patrick and I have already seen it, but we only do one episode per week, so we kind of roll things out. So we got Immaculate, which also opened this weekend. We are going to get to another film that opened this weekend called Late Night with the Devil. That's actually going on Shudder in a few weeks, so I think we're going to kind of time it along with the theater and the Shudder release because we have First Omen, which comes out soon. The First Omen comes out. So just to be aware, I know a lot of horror fans are probably, why didn't you review Immaculate? That's the real horror film this weekend, and I would agree it is. But Ghostbusters is a massive franchise. We would be remiss if we didn't at least review an episode. So Immaculate will be next week. We are going to get to that. That is our next episode. So if you saw Immaculate, stick around. We are going to get there, I promise. If you have questions, if you have movies you'd like us to review, if you'd like to reach out to us, please do so at email. You can hit us up at rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rot, livingdead@gmail.com. And you can also find us on social media. Send us messages there. We'd love to hear from you guys. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead on Instagram, on Twitter/X, and on Facebook. You can send us messages on there. We'd love to hear from you guys and leave us comments. We appreciate that. You can find us on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and of course over on our YouTube channel. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead, and please subscribe to our YouTube. It means so much to us. We're trying to grow our subscriber base over there, so please subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Just again, search Rewind of the Living Dead, and you'll find us over there. And you can also seek us out on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And as always, we appreciate everyone that tunes in each and every week to the show. We'll be back next week as we review the new Sydney Sweeney film, Immaculate. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will see you then.
Peace.